this year, meaning 2021, or next year, 2022, depending on when this uploads, I want to play a lot more FPS games, so I thought I would start with the Crysis Remastered Trilogy. It's a series that I've never played before and I've always been interested in. You always heard a lot of things like, oh, can this run Crysis, about all the tech and stuff, so I was really interested to check it out. And finally I can, because the Remastered Trilogy came to the PS4 earlier this year and I played it on the PS5. The only thing I know about this game are the cool Superpowers. So I played this on my PS5, and can the PS5 run Crysis Remastered Trilogy? Well, let's find out. So let's start with Crysis 1. This game is set on a tropical island, and there's something about tropical islands that just make for a great setting. It's set on a fictional island off the coast of the Philippines, and I'm pretty sure you're fighting North Korean soldiers. And I played this game on hard because originally I was going to go for the platinum. And one really cool feature is that when you play the game on hard, the soldiers don't speak English, so you can't understand what they're saying. And it's a small detail, but it just makes you feel that extra bit more alone, because the game does have a very isolated feeling at the start. So the opening is pretty cool. You get to grips with your suit powers, and then after that you're let into the Breath of the Wild moment, as I like to call them now, where you just walk out and you see the big vista, and the game still looks absolutely stunning. And obviously it's remastered, but for a 2007 game, the landscapes in this look really good. Straight away, I loved how open the levels felt. It kind of felt like all the best parts of Far Cry just kind of condensed down a bit. So it's always going to an encampment to say blow something up, but it's just how you do it that's so fun. You're given so many options. And at the start I was really liking it, except for the controls. So Crysis 1 does this really stupid thing on console, and it almost made me give up after the first hour. So you have 4 powers. You have cloak, you have super speed, you have a shield, and then you have a super jump. And on the original controls, they're bound to different buttons. So super sprint is L3, I believe cloak is L1, shield is R1, and then super jump is X, or like you hold X. But all of these are on a cooldown. You have a little energy bar down the bottom. And the way it's set up is that if you click in L3 to sprint, you use your super speed and it runs out really quickly. So at the start there's a lot of downtime where I was waiting for my bar to recharge. But turns out, and I don't know why these aren't the default controls, if you go into the controls you can change it so that they're on a radial menu. So now you can actually just sprint, because the normal movement speed is so slow and stiff, and I almost gave up until I figured this out. So as I said, the main selling point of this game are the power-up. But the problem is you have an energy bar, and they all use the same energy bar. And the energy bar, which I just said 3 times, is really small. Like, it feels like you could be in stealth for literally like 4 seconds, and then it's gone and you have to wait. And the way the stealth works, the enemies have super laser vision. So once you come out of your cloak, they can see you, and then all hell breaks loose and they just lump a load of enemies at you. And that's another issue that the game has. And the shooting feels okay, but there still is that stiffness in the movement and the shooting that I really didn't like, because the amount of times that I would die because I just didn't feel like the controls felt very good. And then I'd have to go miles back because of how the checkpoint system works, and the checkpoints, once again, aren't great. It is a 2007 game, so you can kind of excuse certain parts of it. But since it's a big open island, like, the levels are pretty big, so you could get a checkpoint at the start, and then it would say drive to this base that's halfway across the map. And the driving controls are actually really good, which is another point I'd like to make. But you drive from point A to B, and you could be driving for, say, a minute. And if you get there and you die, there's a good chance that you didn't get a checkpoint anywhere near it, so then you have to start and drive back. And eventually I just turned the difficulty down, because those little things were just annoying me. I know I'm just talking about issues, but there's one other small issue, and it's in the whole trilogy. Whenever you get to a checkpoint, the game just freezes for a second. I don't understand why. It's obviously something to do with the engine, but it's just a little thing to note. So the story has a few interesting beats. It is cool fighting the North Koreans. There's kind of this intrigue as you go along, and then you realise that it's some alien race. And once these aliens come out, they're really boring. They are just terrible enemies. They just fly around and sponge up a load of hits, and they just blow up when you kill them. It's really bad. Now, one thing is that when you're exploring the alien interiors, it does look really cool. And it has 0 gravity, and the controls actually work really well. Now, I did get a bit confused in these areas. I think it was only 1 level, but the visuals of the interiors were really good. And now, the best thing I saved for last, and it's changing attachments on the fly. Battlefield 2042 has done this, and this was what, like 14 years later when Battlefield finally copped onto it. I don't know why every single player shooter doesn't do this, but if you have your gun in your hand and you hold down the touchpad, you like hold your weapon up like this, and then you can change the attachments on the fly, so you can put a scope on it or a silencer if you want to go stealth, and it's really cool. I just wish every single game had it. Now luckily this carries through the whole series, and it did actually take me a while to realise you could do it in Crysis 1, but once I did, it was just fantastic. Now the ending is pretty cool. I won't spoil it story-wise, but I just want to show like 10 seconds of the boss fight. You fight him on this big aircraft carrier, and it's just really epic. It's just you against this massive alien, and I really enjoyed the fight. It's way better than fighting the small Seth. All in all, I didn't enjoy Crysis 1 whatsoever. I really would not recommend anyone buy this game. If I were you, I wouldn't buy the trilogy unless you can find it physically really cheap. I'd wait until they go on sale individually, and then buy Crysis 2 and 3, which I'll talk about now. So now we're on to Crysis 2, and I fecking adore this game. Instantly, the game feels about 99 million times better to control than Crysis 1. The starting is really cool. Prophet from the first game is infected with some virus that we don't really know what's going on, and he transfers the ownership of his power suit onto you, Alcatraz, and you just go out into New York City, and once again there's a Breath of the Wild moment where you walk through, and you hear the birds flying overhead, and you see the sun rays coming in, and you're walking down a New York street, and it's just brilliant. New York, surprisingly, isn't that common a setting for games, or well, for games that I've played. I've played the Division 1 and 2 and the Spider-Man games, and I think they're the only ones that are set in New York. And having a post-apocalyptic New York, kind of like the Division, is just an amazing setting. And surprisingly in this game, there's quite a bit of visual diversity, and just diversity in the levels in general. So there's some where you're like fighting on the streets, others you might be down in the sewers, other ones you're in office blocks fighting a whole load of enemies. And then the best levels in my opinion are the ones where it's like a run-down New York, and you can see that it's all overgrown, and it really reminds me of The Last of Us. The level structure is way more linear in this game, but it works in its favour. So, even though the game is linear, the encounters are set up where you're given loads of options. So you might be able to take a vantage point that there'll be a sniper there and you can pick people off, or there might be a mounted turret or something like that, or you can flank them and shoot them from somewhere else, or you can go down in the sewers below and sneak around them. And it's clear that in Crysis 1, like, giving you as many options in combat was the way that they designed the game, and it's good to see, even though they've made it more linear here, that they've still stuck to that design philosophy. There's just something about encounters like this that I fecking love. I can't put my finger on it, but it's part of the reason why Far Cry 3 was so addictive. Shadow of Mordor, all them types of open world Ubisoft type games where you're infiltrating compounds, they're just like crack to me, and this game pulls it off perfectly. So you could be walking through the city of New York and you get to a checkpoint and there's loads of enemies and you've just so many different options, and on top of that you have the suit powers, and the suit powers in this game are 1,000,000 times better than the previous. All they had to do was make your energy bar last a bit longer, and the powers just feel infinitely better to use. Just the feeling of sneaking behind enemies, picking up an explosive barrel, throwing it at them, and then power kicking a car towards them. It's just amazing, and from the get-go I was absolutely hooked on this game. Now, sprinkled in with these open-ish encounters, you have very linear sections, and they're really epic. There's some really cool set pieces, and it's only driven home better because it turns out Hans Zimmer had his hand in composing this soundtrack, and it just feels so epic. Obviously the music will be playing in the background. I would just encourage you to just go and listen to this soundtrack. It's really good. Now, I know a lot of people have said good things about the AI in Crysis 1, but I was so blinded by just how much I didn't like that game that I didn't really see how good the AI was, because I was just mowing down enemies because I genuinely didn't care about that game. The human AI in this game, it's okay. It has a few moments where it seems smart, but then there's other parts where they're like spinning around in circles, walking into a wall, and you're just like, I don't understand. But the worst culprit of this is that about halfway through the game, you start fighting the Ceph rather than the humans. And the Ceph are one of the worst enemies I have ever fought in a game, full stop. Loads of them just get stuck spinning in circles. They don't really deal that much damage, and they just take a ganzy load of bullets to kill them, and it's just ridiculous how boring it is to fight them. And there's a good chunk of the game where the only people you're fighting are the Ceph, and it kind of killed the pacing. In general, I do think the pacing of this game is pretty good. So when it opens up, there's plenty of open encounters that let you get used to all your power-ups, and then as you slowly make your way through, it gets linear and linear, and then you get to the Ceph sections, which personally I really didn't like. But then at the end, the open sections, especially Roosevelt Island, I was kind of getting tired of the game, but then it just reminded me of how good fighting the humans and having the open sections is. And just talking about the open encounters, there's one last thing I would like to mention before we go and talk about Crysis 3. And that is that in the final encounter in the game, it lets you just sneak past all of the enemies. So on your way to finish the game, between you and the finish point is a load of Ceph that you have to get around, and you have to do like a few little objectives on your way. And usually a game, you know, it's the final level, so you have to go all guns blazing. You have to shoot everyone, kill everything, blow everything up. But instead the developers just turn around and say, look, if you want to sneak through this whole part, then do it. And that's exactly what I did. I finished the final level in something like 10 or 15 minutes, just because I cloaked, played it safe, completed the objectives, and then the only problem is that right at the end, there was 3 Seth guarding the door to get to like the final cutscene, and I did have to kill them, which kind of ruined it slightly, but I just enjoyed the fact that they let me get up to that point without having to kill anyone. And then on top of that, I don't really think there's any bosses in this game, which is really cool, because I hate when games try to force boss fights where they don't really need one. Like, there's no boss fight in the final level. You just go from the start of the level to the end, you get your cutscene, and then you're done. There's a few enemies that you have to kill that are, like, hard, I guess, but they're not bosses. And I just like the balls that the developers had to do things like that. Don't add bosses. Let you sneak through the final encounter. Like, it's just something that you don't see very often, and I really want to commend them on that. Now, the ending is pretty confusing. I won't spoil anything, but I did have to ask my friend, like, kind of exactly what happened and do a bit of Googling before I fully understood what was going on. But it does lead nicely into Crysis 3, so finally, let's talk about the final game in the trilogy. Now, the only issue with Crysis 3 is that I didn't play it much. I got 2 hours into it, and now the game won't launch. Don't ask me why. I've done everything. Apparently people have had issues playing them off external hard drives. Mine is on my hard drive. I have the disc, I have the physical copy. And for whatever reason, it just won't launch. I managed to play the first 2 hours and now it won't launch. I've deleted it, reinstalled it, cleared the cache, done all this. I think maybe if I reset my PlayStation, but I don't want to reset my PlayStation. I don't want to have to re-download all my games just to play 4 more hours of a game, because apparently Crysis 3 is ridiculously short. But I'll talk about the first 2 hours, but it's only going to be short. As I said, the best levels in Crysis 2 are the overgrown levels. And the whole of New York is overgrown now because the Seth are gone apparently and Cell have taken over and you have to just get rid of them. Once again, you still have your cool suit, the powers are amazing. Psycho from the first game is back and he doesn't have a suit and you can see the effects that has had on his body, which I think is actually a really cool idea. In general, I think the narrative gets a lot better as it goes on. In the first one, obviously they went for open gameplay design, but that meant that there weren't many cutscenes, so the narrative was quite sparse. And then in the second one, they still had a small bit of openness, but they gave you loads of cutscenes, developed a few more characters, and just gave you way more backstory. And I was actually kind of into it in Crysis 2. And just from the start of Crysis 3, I can already see that the narrative is, once again, a big focus on it. So I'm kind of a bit disappointed that I won't get to see it out. I might just watch some videos on it. But so far, I am enjoying it. So obviously the game feels great to control. And from the first 2 hours, it seems that they're going for a more open approach than Crysis 2. So maybe like a melding of Crysis 1 and Crysis 2 together. So you're still confined to like a small map. But like one of the missions, you have to creep through tall grass to avoid a big massive tower that's launching rockets down on you. And there's a few side objectives that you can do on your way to help you, which is really cool. And I am kind of disappointed that I won't get to see it through. And since I don't have much to say about Crysis 3, I just kind of want to leave this point here. With how strong the suit is in Crysis, I'm really disappointed that Far Cry 3 wasn't a Crysis game. Look, Far Cry 3 revolutionised the open world genre and I absolutely love the game. I have great memories of it and even to this day it's still a good game. But I can only imagine how good Far Cry 3 would have been if it was Crysis 4, say, for argument's sake. And it was the same design, same tropical island. And instead of being really grounded, you had these cool weapons. You could even have normal weapons, but have the suit. And then you could have the powers, and it would just make infiltrating all the bases so much better. As a trilogy, I probably wouldn't buy this at full price. I paid €55 for it, and considering Crysis 3 broke, I'll probably just trade it in. It's on GameStop's trade list over here in Ireland, so I can trade it in and get a game for €20 with it. So I'll be pretty happy with that. I really enjoyed Crysis 2, disliked Crysis 1, and Crysis 3 I think I would have liked. Now I did kind of feel myself getting a bit burnt out just because I played the 3 games in quick succession. But I think Crysis 3 was setting up to be a very, very solid game. Even with the Seth and 2 kind of killing the pacing in the middle, I still think it's one of my favourite FPSs I've ever played. There was just something about how the encounters were designed that just, it was like crack to me. And I wish I'd played it earlier. Well, maybe not actually, because it probably wouldn't have run very well. It's nice to play it in 60 FPS now with very few hiccups. But anyway, this is quite a long video. So I really appreciate everyone for sticking around. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and join the Discord down below. I really appreciate your time. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you all on the next video.